right. Welcome everybody to our Lunch and Learn today on Race Relations. I'm Bill Russell, President of the Chamber of Commerce, and I did not tell him I'm going to do this, but my board chair, David Keith, do you want to say something on behalf of the Chamber from your
Sure. Thanks everyone for being here today. I mean, this is going to be a great conversation. Looking forward to anything that my friend Chris Hailey has to say. So just seeing him in the room validates some things for everybody. But thank you for your support of the Chamber, and thank you for having so many people in the room today, on top of everyone who's zooming in as well.
Thank you, David. We want to thank our sponsor of today, Famous Toastery and Davidson, and also they have locations in Huntersville as well. They supplied the food, and it's absolutely delicious. So again, we want to thank Famous Toastery. I'm going to turn it over to our chair of our Diversity Council, Dan. Dan, if you'll introduce our panelists.
I sure will. Thank you so much, Bill. You know, and don't forget there's some dessert there. You can't leave that. Because if you leave it, I'm going to take it home with me. So it's good. It's good to be here, folks. This is to me, it's an exciting time to be in, and we are what we call the Ebony and Ivory group. That's who we are essentially, and we've been meeting for about 2 years to discuss some topics that most communities have had problems discussing. And it's a testimony to us in terms of how we've been able to negotiate some of the difficult conversations around race and race relationships, even given the time period in terms of we came together around the death and the killing of George Floyd. And during that time, you all know the tensions was pretty high in this community and the communities all over the country. So we decided to get together and spend a little bit of time talking about those things that were, can I use a word called untalkable? I don't know if that's in the dictionary or not. But for the most part, there was a lot of tension and people were walking around in eggshells. And it didn't matter where you came from, your background, what language you spoke, what your disability might have been, what your sexual orientation might have been. We all had some apprehension during that time period. So we came together, and I want my group, I call it my group, because we've been meeting for about 2 years now, almost 2 years, and to introduce themselves, the members to introduce themselves, and to just talk a little bit about their backgrounds. I want you to hear the differences in background in terms of this group. So why don't we start, I'm gonna come back to each of you guys in a second, but let's go ahead and start with John. John, introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are, if you don't mind.
Okay, my name is John Foster. I'm a co-owner of Foster's Framing Art Gallery, along with my wife of 42 years. Foster's Framing Art Gallery has been in business in Huntersville this past October for 22 years. My background, and I get this question all the time, and my wife always say, when people ask me, what have you done or what's your background? And my wife said, you'd probably be better off to ask them, what is it that you haven't done or tried? But I tell people all the time that I basically have been in people business all my post-college years, and even when I was in college, in high school, I feel like that I have been in people business all my time. Pretty much as an adult, started off working in soft good retailing. I'm a Texan, grew up in the country in southeast Texas, north of Houston. Went to work out of college in Houston, got transferred from Houston to Columbus, Georgia, from Columbus, Georgia to Atlanta, met my wife there, lived in Atlanta metro area for a number of years, for lots of years. Then we decided we wanted to move, and doing a survey of asking ourselves, where could we go that would be any better than what Atlanta had been or what Atlanta was to us at that time. And I had a good buddy of mine, and we're still buddies, to work with the Census Bureau, and asked him to send me some packages on 2 or 3 places in the Southeast. Well, after reading for about a month, we decided, I really think that Charlotte, in the metro Charlotte area, is going to be one of the next major growth areas. What we see in the Metro Charlotte area back almost 30 years ago is what we anticipated, what we see today. We almost hit it dead on. And we moved here with the idea that we were gonna become entrepreneurs. And we did not have no idea that it was gonna be in the field that we were in. Cause I always had the attitude that I was gonna go into a need field, and what did I do? We went into a want area. But basically, it's been people. And probably the most enjoyable part of it has been the people that we've made contact with and that we've come in contact with. And when I think about the people that we've come in contact with or that we have as a customer base for what we're doing here, it's really make it kind of interesting. Even though Bill will tell you that I had reservations about me doing this. Because the guys on the panel tell you that I'm a pretty much in your face guy when it comes to race relations.
Yeah, he sure is. But he's a people person though. Angela, can you tell us a little bit about, are you from Texas also?
Am I from
Right?
Texas?
Yeah.
Do I look like I'm from Texas? Come on.
All right.
Actually, I am originally from the New England area. I grew up in New Hampshire, central New Hampshire, moved pretty much, I lived in Connecticut for a little bit, and then prior to moving to Boston some 22 years, to North Carolina from Boston some 22 years ago, spent my whole life in the Northeast. So when I first moved here, I'm not gonna lie, it was a little bit of a culture shock for me. And for me, I know sometimes Boston has the reputation of being a rather racist city. And I will have to say to you, honestly, I did not experience that while I was there. The first time I experienced true racism was when I moved to the South. So, and I'm sure that lots of people find that very surprising. I found it surprising. So I decided, Jay reached out to me and said, here's this group we've gotten together, and you're, what did you say? You're a rather outspoken individual, I think is what he may have said to me, and we were wondering if you would be willing to join this group and help us figure out how to figure this mess out. And so here I am.
Yeah. So she's been such a good way, I mean, a detailed mind, maybe because she works in a law firm, helps us to keep on track as we went through this process. So I really want to thank you for that, Angela, the way you did that. So, Jay, Jay's a very people person. And he's probably from the South somewhere, Jay, is that?
I am probably from the South, you would never know it. You know, it started with me being barefoot, going to school, walking uphill both ways, and,
A whole bunch of snow up
you know, I am from Gallatin, Tennessee, outside of Nashville, and went to Ole Miss, and moved to Charlotte area, was recruited by Price Waterhouse to go into their consulting side of the business that PW had. Then we were PW, not PWC as it is now. And did that for 4 years, and then I went back into industry. Long story short, I wound up, you know, did a lot of things with entrepreneurs and merger acquisitions, opened my own accounting firm to do merger and acquisitions with other bigger companies, and wound up, haven't really done many because there's so many small entrepreneurs that need help. Their issues are just like B.F. Goodrich's issues, but they're more zeros on B.F. Goodrich. You know, but also entrepreneurs will have to go clean toilets. We have to go order supplies. It's not like you have a dedicated person for all this, and it's hard, and it's lonely. We all know it's very lonely. So that's kind of what we have built our firm around. And you know, and then when all of this happened with the George Floyd, it's kind of sparked something else that you know, I don't know if I hadn't addressed, or if it was just something that would been, you know, looking for a way to come out, so to speak, and I had the opportunity. So I'll speak a little bit more in a little while, but you know, that's, my mother's from Mississippi, my father's from Tennessee. You know, I'm a good old Southern boy, but was raised education was important.
I like that. And you know, and Jay has been really good in the group in terms of raising some difficult questions for people like me who you guys may have noticed I'm an African American male, age 29. Y'all noticed that? You picked that? Oh, okay, 29. And the thing about Jay, it was really good, is that he asked the tough questions of someone like me. And I'll talk about my background in a second. And I really appreciate asking the tough questions, because it caused me to really stop for a second, think about it, and then try to have a response. And here's the thing, trying to have a response that didn't make him feel like he shouldn't have asked the question, but also responding in a way that allowed both of us, who we both have what we call growth mindsets. I don't know if y'all know the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset. The fixed mindset is someone I always call a stubborn person. In my background, the person believes that they know all the answers, they got all the answers, they were raised the right way, everything in their world is right, so they don't need to change. If it's not broke, Jay, what is it? If it's not
Don't
broke,
fix it, man.
don't try to fix it. So we both had a growth mindset, and a growth mindset essentially in this area, all it means essentially is that we know we don't have all the answers, but we're willing to stretch ourselves. We're willing to go outside of our comfort zone to get the answers. That's the growth mindset. You don't have to have the answer. That's the key thing I think that we learned. We don't have all the answers. But Jay was really good at saying, okay, Dad, I hear what you're saying, but this, and this. And I hated the but. I wanted them to say, okay, Dan, I agree with you. Let's move on. No, but the but came in. Jay, thank you for
Well, you would
all the buts.
fall back on cliche answers sometimes.
I did, huh? This is the first
And
time I'm hearing
that
this.
was and I would, that's what I would challenge, and you challenge me, and I mean, we all challenge each other when we say when we say the normal, typical cliche response to something.
Yeah.
No, man, that doesn't work. You know, what's the real deal? And
Yeah,
so
that's so true. Hey, Chris, Texan. You from Texas?
I'm from New York. You all can hear from my voice. I'm a little country boy from Anson County, Waynesboro, North Carolina. I grew up family of 10. It was 5 boys and 5 girls, and we were poor, not poor. We were poor. And I always tell people, I remember when I went off to college, we were all athletes. My mom asked me, she said, son, where are you going? I said, Mom, we're going to school. She said, okay. So they never see me play college ball at all. But graduated from HBCU, Shaw University in Raleigh. Went into law enforcement from there, the Raleigh Police Department, the North Carolina Highway Patrols. And so my whole career has been public safety. I was director of public safety training for Central Piedmont Community College, where we train firemen, EMTs, law enforcement, and so forth. So I'm currently retired, not retired, but I'm doing something to keep me busy. And Jay here, I remember when we first got together, he told me, he said, Chris, doing the George Floyd situation. He said, you're the only black friend I got. And
token black friend.
and so that's how we got into it, because he knew my law enforcement background and
But we knew each other from the
yes,
chamber.
from the chamber. And so it's been great, on this subject that Jay started, and so it's pretty much who I am.
And in Chris and I, we look the same. he's probably a little.
That's another cliche.
Yeah.
All look alike,
We have similar skin color. We talk, and we probably eat just about the same foods, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
But we are a little different.
Yeah.
And it came out in a lot of our conversations, and it was really interesting. hearing from a law enforcement person who has a different political persuasion than I do. I'll let him talk about that. But for the most part, it was really energizing to be beat up by both Jay and Chris at the same time. Okay, my name is Dan Houston, and as our president of the chamber said, I'm chair of the Diversity Council, which is sponsoring this, and what we've been doing over the last couple of years, this last year actually, has been sponsoring a series of forums around these issues of race relations, and it's been really a good journey now. And so my background essentially is I was born in Georgia, and I was raised in New York City. And I went back to Raleigh, Durham when I was in my early 20s, and I worked at St. Augustine College right across the street from Shaw University for 10 years. And so I have that background that I was born, Southern born, Northern raised, kind of do. And so pretty much like Chris, grew up with a grandmother who somehow was able to put together a meal for 10 people with some neck bones and some fried chicken and some gravy and some biscuits, and everybody was able to eat. And yet at the same time, my grandmother had, I always enjoyed this. She had a 2-room house with a kitchen in the same room as her bedroom, and she had an outhouse, and we used to have to go to the outhouse. So she didn't have running water in her house, and we had to go outside to go to the outhouse. You know, that's your definition of being poor. And I laugh because right now, in my house now, I'm trying to figure out how I made this transition, but in my house now, I have 3.5 bathrooms. Every time I go into one of my bathrooms, it blows my mind. Because in one generation, we were able to go from an outhouse to 3.5 bathrooms. Now, I'm not gonna tell you who keeps those bathrooms clean. But for the most part, do you know that, I mean, that came up in some of our discussions too. How do you make those transitions? And can you make those transitions if you're not of the dominant culture? And what's preventing you from making that transition? Some of the things that we talked about. But one of the questions, we have 3 questions I want us to get to before we end today. One of those questions is who are we? We kind of discussed that already. But the second question is why do we get together in the first place? Jay, why did we get together in the first place?
Take notes. No. We all remember certain days in our lives when things occur. In fact, do you know that today is the day John F. Kennedy was killed? 1963, November 22nd. April 4th, 1968, what happened? Martin Luther King was assassinated. May 25th, 2020, what happened? George Floyd was murdered. We had riots starting the day after, and from May 26th to August to the, from that day in May to the end of August, there were riots all over our country. And for me, it was like, how could, and Dan called me on this one in the very beginning, how could they be doing this? Okay? And let me stop right there a minute. We have to agree that if we're going to work through our issues, and they're not yours and yours, they're mine and they're yours, and we share common issues and common, biases, but we gotta set those aside and be in a position where we can trust each other enough to talk about it. I mean, I've got this was a book, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And it's written by, ma'am? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought somebody said something. Emmanuel Ocho wrote this book. And and he starts off with a first person on a podcast he did, or he does, was Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey said, okay, are you black, you African American? And that's how it started. The uncomfortable, just knowing and not knowing what to do, how to act, how to learn. You know, Chris was great in teaching me that you got to seek first to understand before you can really make a change in yourself. And, you know, getting back now, we had the riots. 93% were peaceful, but 7% of the riots caused an estimated $1 to $2 billion in damages across our country. A lot of them were in the same area that the rioters represented. That they were destroying their, you know, the rioters, they were destroying their own property, and it just didn't make sense. We also saw that what I thought was the start of Black Lives Matter. Well, that's not where it started. I was telling Chris, I learned that today. That it started back with George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. When George Zimmerman went back in, 2013 or 14, but I learned, and so now it makes more sense. But anyway, I was mad about it. I was angry about it. I didn't understand why. I understand the George Floyd thing, but I was waiting to see, you know, all we have is a camera. We don't know what really happened, yada, yada, yada. And so I said, I got to talk to somebody. And so I went to email, and I did Chris, and you know, from there I said, Chris, how are you, sir? It's been too long since we spoke, and hope all is going well. With the events of the past few weeks being in the forefront of most of our minds, I need to understand more, and then I have a few thoughts on how we can address this. So it was George Floyd's murder that really started this for me, started this trek, I guess, or, you know, discovery. And, you know, he and I had lunch at Duckworth's. And I think I don't know if it was O'Charlie's then or not, but we talked, and I learned so much in that first discussion. But I also knew that for us to learn, we have to both be able to tell our sides. It can't be just Jay listening to Chris talk about growing up as, you know, being black, and, you know, and I'm taking all the notes and stuff. There's also some things that he can learn from me as well. And I think that's what brought this initial group together. Chris and I met with Bill and wanted to talk about how we could take this further. How do we do this? And from there is where John and Angela and, you know, Chris and Dan came to be part of our group, and the Ebony and Ivory group, you know.
That's how it started, yeah.
That's
Chris,
how it started.
How did you feel when Jay approached you during the midst of all of the stuff going on around George Floyd? What were you thinking when you got this email from Jay?
I probably would have been offended if I didn't know Jay. Telling me you the only black friend I know.
I didn't put that in the email though. You can't prove I said that.
But it's okay, because I knew Jay, and so it didn't offend me. It was welcoming more than anything else, because now I get a chance to let Jay see from a black male's perspective, from my vision. I mean, I don't represent all black people. It was just from my vision. And that's when we came to the conclusion we're gonna seek to understand before we're understood. Because this could have been very much contentious. And so our whole group, as a result, that's what we talked about. And we never had any discomfort with our conversations.
Well, in fact, you and I met for lunch over a year before it even got to being a group of 5.
Yeah.
That's interesting too. Angela, what do you think kept us together over the last, because it's been almost 2 years since we've been meeting on and off pretty much. Any ideas about what kept us together? Why didn't we just say, hey, that's nice, we had nice little conversations, But I got other things to do. Why do we stick with this?
Because I think that we all agreed that this is the white elephant in so many rooms. And why can't we figure out how to figure it out? And so I think we have a mutual respect for one another, which is, I think, paramount for everything. We set some ground rules, as Dan and Chris said. You know, you set your egos at the door, and you have to be open to seeing it through someone else's view. You can't just, the growth mindset versus the closed mindset. We've developed, I think we all knew each other cordially when we first got together, but over the past 2 years, we've learned so much more about one another and about the different backgrounds that we have, that we trust each other even more, and we have an immense respect for one another. And I think that the idea of us feeling comfortable and being able to be totally honest is something, we felt safe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's never a meeting that goes by that one or all of us don't feel challenged by some question that somebody else asked.
There should be numbers on this.
And we also learn something every time.
Yeah, because I like what you're saying, some of the values, and we didn't call it values, but you mentioned respect, trust, and feeling safe, which are really good values. How did that help us to stay together for the most part? How Chris, Jay, anybody can answer this, but those are values. Did we sit down and say, we're gonna have ground rules and these are the values we're gonna follow? Did we do that, or did that something that evolved as we continue to talk to each other? What do y'all think?
I think it was more of the ground rules.
Somewhere in here, I mean, we didn't, it was not, everything was discussed, it was kind of, I guess, understood.
Understood.
Yeah, I think a lot of it happened organically.
Yeah.
It's just, but when we started to discuss it, we talked about, when we talked about doing this or presenting to other groups, we talked about, okay, if we're gonna make this a pilot and let others know what we're doing and try to spread that, then we need to be able to set ground rules and tell folks what it was that we agreed to when we joined this group, and how the conversations were had. And anyone that wasn't comfortable with that scenario probably wouldn't be best suited to be sitting at the table with us.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that also along those same lines is that it's so important that both colors respect each other in our group. In other words, I can, you know, blacks and whites are both biased. Not just whites, we're all biased. We're biased all in different ways, but coming from the understanding that we're both, our greatest strengths, our greatest weakness, so to speak. And that gives, I did not want this group to be something where I, as a white man, was constantly explaining myself or constantly trying to, just take it to the nth degree of what it is that I do or don't do or believe or don't believe, because I am who I am, but I want to understand better. So show me the weakness in you. And it's almost like a therapy group, it's
That's true.
a self-help therapy
Yes.
group. But showing each other's weakness really helps to learn about each other.
Yeah. And Chris, and I'm gonna come to you in a second, John, in terms of the whole notion of ground rules. And I'm gonna ask you a question about the ground rules. We established ground rules almost organically in terms of being together. But if it's just one-on-one conversation you might have with someone that might be different than you, is there some way you can establish ground rules so that's a safe conversation? But before I go to you, again, Chris, I just want to get a little bit more on you in terms of values, boundaries, feeling comfortable with, say, Jay having lunch with her. Did he buy lunch, by the way? Or
I think I did.
Yeah, but
What the hell does that matter?
but the values and the boundaries, how did you see that?
There were no boundaries in what we discussed. It was all free flowing. It got to a point where, I said, Jay, I've been considered a sellout to my community just because I was a registered Republican. And, I ran for office as sheriff, and my race had absolutely nothing to do with black, white. It was just how to make the community better. But, I had to get him to see it from my lens about, my values, and he understood that. And so what was your take?
I think my take was, I think we even in our first discussion, we started talking about the Black Lives Matter. And I said, why is that more important than white lives matter or all of our lives matter? And we talked through some of that. Please don't ask me to repeat it because I remember us talking through it all. But it was like, oh, I see that a little clearer now. And, we really haven't gotten to anything to where you or Dan or John's asking me or Angela about something. Because I think I'm still trying to learn. But, I would like for it to we're still working on what it looks like and where do we go from here.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And John, would you pick up on that, and just in terms of, can people come together as individuals who might have a different lens, as Chris is calling it? Is that?
Well, that's one thing that we talked about, and I guess we still have not really just found a mechanism to be able to do that. We talked, the group that we have here today, we talked about how could we have a session like this, and even larger session in the community on an ongoing basis, to talk about race relationship and try to really get to understand each other. Jay said something, and I don't think I've ever said this and everything else, and go back to what you just said. He talked about the riots with George Floyd and some of the riots before that. But when you really go back, if you're a Bible reader, there has been riots since the beginning of time. So, we want to categorize riots and unrest is something new to America in its black-white situation. But there's always riots and marches and destruction have been another way to get other people attention. I'm being overlooked. So that's something, Jay, and I don't think I've ever said that. That's something that's not new. It's been with us forever. It put people in a very uncomfortable situation. It make people have to react. What happened?
I think the fact that they were occurring all in 180, 200 cities around this country had a big impact, though, instead of it being a one here, one.
Well, but if you look back at the civil rights movement, we had riots, especially in the southern city. Well, even in the New Yorks and the Chicagos and LA, we had riots even during that time period. Don't know if we would be where we are today as a country if those riots and demonstrations had not taken place. They were very uncomfortable. There were some very good people that died, unfortunately, and because that's the only way that we got some coverage from the media was through that mechanism. So it was an unfortunate situation, but we would not have some of the things that we have today if those riots had not taken place. You know,
Good point.
you take George Floyd, I talk about it all the time, and my wife and everything else. The young lady that photographed George Floyd killing that day, I don't know if she's ever gotten the recognition, or if she ever will get the recognition that she should have. But for a young lady her age to just be able to stand there and record what she did, that she was the real history that day. Because without that tape, there'd just been another black man dead. But it was something that the world and America could not deny did not happen. In talking to somebody, and it might have been last week or so, that you have someone, I was someplace, but it was talked about that you had someone to sit there and took someone's life, and it was just so uncommon. It was almost like nothing happened. I'm drinking a cup of coffee today. You know, that's really, you say, how can someone, a human being, do that to another human being? But we asked ourselves, can we ever put together a group where we meet on an ongoing basis and we talk about a number of books that we possibly could read? And there's some very good books out there on race relations and how we live in America and what our past has been and where we come from and where we need to go. But can we get people to read some of these books? And that's a good book there, Jay. I've just gotten started into it, but I'm excited about finishing.
See, I never knew about Black Wall Street.
You need to go to Tulsa.
I've got the book.
Everybody
I have
here that's
the
never been
book,
to
but-
Tulsa,
You didn't know about Emmett Till either.
I had no clue about Emmett Till.
So I had to tell them about Emmett Till, and Angela.
But Angela didn't know it either. And I don't want to embarrass everybody, but how many white people in the room know about Emmett Till? White people, let's say we got.
Okay, so apparently it's a good thing we're in the group we're in, Jay.
That's right, you know.
But then we started talking about diversity and quotas, and Angela, you remember you said that, what you say about jobs, you know? How did
Because
you put
in
it?
my mind, the candidate who has the best skill set should get the job. And without understanding that I'm looking through it through my own set of lenses. And then Chris, and I think you should share your situation. When I heard his scenario, I thought, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
But because I had never listened to anybody else, and it was just my tunnel vision that the person with the best skills, that's the way it should be. And that's not necessarily the way it should be. And that was based on something I learned from Chris Hailey.
And a prime example, I mean, I've gone through a lot of different scenarios in my life, is with the highway patrols, for instance. They always did a T-score, and that's the average score when everybody taking the test in order to become a member of the highway patrols. Well, usually they couldn't get enough minorities to get at that average. So in my class, for instance, there were 60 cadets in there. There was 30 blacks and 30 whites. In my opinion, it was all intentional. Out of the 60, only 30 of us graduated, but only 6 of the blacks, the 30, graduated. And I knew it was for quota purposes. And I know my T-score, when I found out, it was much lower than the average. But in my opinion, they intentionally brought in minority candidates that couldn't even read. Because when you get in there, they made everybody read. And I say, you know, something not quite right with this. In my opinion, they satisfied the federal government by saying they did hire enough candidates in this school. We put them in, but they couldn't pass. And in my opinion, they did that intentionally. And the only ones who actually got through the Highway Patrol Academy either had a college degree or military. And there was only 6 of us out of the 30. So they satisfied the government. Now, because my T-score was still lower than the average, you know, I got in based on a quota because I'm a minority, but it didn't make me I was a better trooper than the ones at the top. At the end of the school, my grades were at the top like everybody else. Everybody was separated by fractions of score. But it doesn't, a test scores does not define who you are, and you need that diversity. And we were able to learn a lot from each other. One white trooper, a good friend of mine, he taught me how to catch black drivers, black drunk drivers. And I taught him how to catch white drunk drivers. And now go figure, you know? So he told me some things even about the hoopty.
See, I've never heard of a hoopty before.
Me either.
I mean, the hoopty, I mean, that's what I grew up driving, seeing everybody drive. There's nothing uncharacteristic about that. You know, you're not drunk. And then I told him about 3 white males in the truck after 6 p.m. So it's that diversity where we teach
And a gun
each other.
rack, yeah, no.
Yeah, because if you know, we don't want to live in a monolithic society where everybody's the same. I mean, we need to be able to learn from each other, and we have really learned a lot from each other. Also in this group as a whole, sharing our experiences. So we need quotas.
And we also have to remember that there are more ethnic groups than just white and black.
Right, yes.
And we have there is a large Hispanic population in the Lake Norman area. I don't know, why are we, you know, how do you bring everybody in? I know this is an ebony and ivory discussion, but should it be expanded further?
Well, Jake, you know, and I hope I'm gonna get this out right.
You're getting
Those other groups, first of all, I think they have to want to be brought in. You know, when I look at where America is today and where America started, and who really helped build America and everything else. And I look around at the various groups in white, black, Latinos, Indians, Asians, and everything else. Unfortunately, when you really look at it, African American is really the only group out of the whole group, if you can say the whites can say it, if they can say it, that can't really just sit down and say that I have a home, I have some other place or a country that I'm tied to. You know, we can say that we go back to Africa to visit Africa, but can we really tie our heritage or our families back? I get people come in the store all the time. They got families that they can tie back to all these different countries. Well, our races have here, African Americans especially, have been mixed so that we don't know who we are.
You mean we don't know where we came from, you're saying?
Well, not only that, but you're not really a pure African. You know, it's just a matter of are you German? Are you British? Are you Native American? Because again, we basically had been mixed with so many other races from the time that we got off the ship, and probably in many cases before we ever got off the ship, coming over here. Because we basically were brought here not to live and be part of the society. We were brought here to be bred to work, to make a country that there was not enough white people to make America what it is today. So they had to have a workforce. Well, we became that workforce. So really, we don't really say that Asian, a guy from Japan, he can go back to Japan because he's got family there.
Mm-hmm.
The Indians can go back to India because they got family there.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that, and I'm glad you're raising these questions because I want you to hear, there's two things going on here. One is there's the process where we actually use our values and boundaries to be able to have the conversation. You gotta understand that there's a process, there's a way to have the conversation, and then there's the content of the conversation. Once you decided how to have the conversation, then the content becomes really important. What we find out is that a lot of people have come up with the content where they disagreement, but they don't have a process of respect, of trusting each other, feeling safe, and that causes that tension. What I'd like to do now, we got about 15 minutes left, and I'd like just to open it up.
Dan, let me just make
Well,
one
let me
comment.
just before.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back.
That's okay.
But I'd like to open it up in about a minute and a half. So if you got some questions, think about some questions you might want to ask the panel, with the understanding that we're not experts in this area. In fact, I always tell people, the more you find out about stuff in this area, diversity, inclusion, and equity, the more you find out about it, guess what?
The more you find out,
The more questions you have, the more things that come up where you realize you just don't know. So we're not experts here, but Jay will tell you that he's the, no, okay, Jay, I'm sorry.
Write this down. No. One of the first things that we all discussed, and it was in my mind when Chris and I were talking about how do he and I take our lunches further than just the two of us meeting, was that how well does a message, does it solve anything when you have somebody sitting up in an auditorium stage and 2 or 3 people, a panel of telling you what's going to happen or what needs to happen, or here's what you need to do, we do this and that. I think it works better when that audience has started amongst themselves, started working together and providing the environment to open it up to that audience to learn about others. I'm not talking about a group of 50. I think 5 to 10 is the most you really need in clusters, just to talk things out and to learn about each other. And I think that's where so often we hear the people on executives on boards and that run major multinational companies, they start talking about this, but they're talking. And I would love to be able to see all the audience working things out and coming up with ideas instead of just going and listening to somebody and taking notes.
Thanks for that, because that could be one question we throw on the floor is, what do you think we should do next? I mean, Bill's got a huge budget. we could probably tap into that. No, I'm only kidding about that. Y'all forget I said that. But what do you think we should do next? What do y'all think?
I have been really lucky, and when I came to the United States in '89, I had to learn English quick.
From where?
From Lima, Peru. There was a big civil war, and I lived with my dad, big business. We were going to an American school, highly educated, really good place in Peru. But things happened, so I had to move here and adjust. And I adjusted during the 80s, like, Feed the Young, we did Feed the World, Hands Across America, you guys were G.I. Joe, everything was, Lady Jane, everybody was inclusion, Michael Jackson, black and white. We were always talking about it and trying to make it better. At least in the 80s, that's how I felt. I think that's gone away, but even the Green New Deal and stuff like that, like Captain Planet. Remember, it was all about trying to help each other out. And then I graduated and I went straight to the military. And in the military, one thing is there is no color, you're all green. And I love my drill sergeant that says, there is no segregation here, you're all equally worthless. But it made us work together, and if you want to do something that can help out and help each other learn more about differences, one of the things that I love is the Explorer program for medic and Union EMS, because in the back of that ambulance, there is no rank, there's no black and white, there is nothing. There is, can you get me a sheet? I need a stretcher, I need a bag valve mask, I need you to get a blood pressure cuff. Can you help me do this? Talk to the family. There is nothing in the back of the truck that would do that. Even in the fire department, when I worked in Concord Fire, brotherhood meant something. It wasn't brotherhood in the fire department, you could hate the guy next to you, but you're fighting fire. You have to work together. And if anybody wants to sign up for that program and be part of that and see it, and especially if you take people to the ER, you'll see it in the ER room. Working together, I think, helps us work through all of this. And of course, we joke about our differences, especially in the fire department, but it's kind-hearted. I still feel like from the kid back from the 80s, where we had this talk about trying to be better. And I think if we do that and trying to see not just race, but how we work together as different races. Not just, I have a point of view and I want to make it, or you have a different point of view and I want to make it. Let's work together to see us blend into a good, cohesive team.
That's good.
Okay, now, you hit on one, and we will have to have a much longer conversation about it to really, for me to probably convince you about it and everything. You talk about the military. I didn't go to the military. Had a skin rash when I got drafted, and
Just happened to?
no, believe it or not, I was prepared to go, but I never did get called back and everything else. But I have a huge family that have, from my father on up, that have been part of the U.S. military forces in the past all the way up through today. I have a number of family members that sit in the various branches of the military now. Something we've always supported, always believed in. Has it been fair and equitable? By far not. By far not. Not even close. And there's a number of things that I could really just sit down and talk about that one and everything else. You know, and that's one that you would think that it would have been that way. Now, the drill sergeants may tell you that, but in reality, it's not. And we don't have the time, but sometime we can get together and talk about some of it. But I think after we finish talking, I think you'll see what.
But it's okay for you all to disagree on this, and that's the thing
Right.
that we
No, I
do.
agree
We
with
just
that.
talk stuff out. It's not like, you know,
Yeah,
in your
that's
face or whatever, and that's what makes it so good.
Right, that's the process we were talking about.
Right.
Right.
Why don't we go ahead and, please?
Yeah, so I love this conversation. I'm a native of Cornelius, and you don't find a lot of us that grew up here. So a couple of things on how to advance this. I had a conversation earlier this year with a lady that I grew up with. She's a white female. She was my best friend. We grew up in Cornelius. We walked to school together. And she wanted to get in touch with my aunt because my aunt used to house sit her. She wanted to tell her how much she meant to her, and she was embarrassed because of all these years. My aunt had stopped taking care of them, and she never really let her know how much of an impression she had made on her life. But she also said to me, you had no idea that I had to ask you over to my house on the weekends when my dad was on the road driving his truck because he was racist. And he was calling you the N-word, and I knew none of this. So how to advance is finding people, even if, because I'm big on history here, that have grown up, and I told her we should have this conversation. More people should be able to open up about our differences, but what we have in common. And her dad is still racist. She's gay, and he hates gays and blacks and everybody. But to the point, she's not that person. And that's a way to find people that are really open and honest about having this conversation. My next point is, I've been working with Matthews. They have the blueprint for what it takes to advance this conversation and to keep it going. Pastor Chuck Whitley of Matthews United Methodist and Reverend Larry Whitley, you probably know, who's also a former highway patrol and a councilman. Once a quarter or once every 2 months, I moderate a session where they come together and they talk about everything. Everything's on the table, and they bring their congregations together. So maybe it doesn't start with the church. Yes, and they talk about everything. They've even got an agreement. They call it peace meals, where they get together, people from his church and the other church, and they go and have lunch or dinner together. And they've done this for like 2 years, 3 years, and they continue to do it. And it's very powerful, and now all of the pastors in Matthews are involved, and they just keep the conversation going. And I've been telling them for so long, they've got the blueprint, they're on to something. Please share with other towns
Do they break out their groups, or do they just, everybody gets in one big
We
pit?
come
and talk?
together, Matthews United Methodist will have it once, and then we'll have it over at Reverend Whitley's church, and we all come together on an evening, and everything's on the table, we talk about it, they get a panel together, and we have the conversation. Now, what they do as churches, as far as the peace meals, that's something they do separately, but these sessions, and they're very well attended, and people are really honest about what's happening in the town, how they feel about it, because, you know, everything's shifting.
Do they have breakout sessions with the people?
No, they do not. That's what, I believe that happens when they have the peace meals, when they go one-on-one with one another.
Got it.
And, you know, I salute them for keeping it going for so long.
But we also have to say, I know we're coming to an end, that racism is alive and well. It's more polarized now than ever before. And I think because of the internet, you know, people coming up with these fake accounts to get their racism out and talk about it, you know, they're hiding behind these things, and it makes it worse. And, you know, I think because of the internet, it's you know, what they're saying now, they're pulling off the hoods. No, hoods are still on. They're hiding behind social media. And it's making it worse. I have experienced it quite a bit. My son goes to a private school. He's still experiencing it. But we gotta talk about this. It's live and well. So I don't want you all to think, you know, because we didn't say anything controversial, that racism is okay, because it's not.
And the other thing, I like our conversation around young people and you doing generational. Talk a little bit about your work with generation. I just want to just mention that real quick.
My name is Lee Chapman, and I'm the founder of Global Minds United. And this is Dawn Kakitsis, and she is our Director of Outreach and Communications. And what Global Minds United does is we work with students, teachers, parents, admin, and we have an awareness workshops that we build. And it starts with implicit bias and moves on to how we build our identities, human rights, because one of the things I found when I created Global Minds United is that when you talk about human rights and psychology, you're getting to the core, because you will see racism, sexism, you know, you see it across all the different identity domains. So let's go really deep to find out why it is you have these biases or fear or hatred, because a lot of times you find that the people that are biased towards a race are also biased towards LGBTQ+ communities. So we really try to work with students. We have a summer summit every year. Last year, our summer summit was called Curious Minds, Connected Community, because we found that a lot of times working within the school systems, you get some polarization. You have parents that are okay with us coming in and having discussion around these subjects, and other parents that are very much against it. But with our summer summit, we had over 60 students representing 15 local high schools of all different identity domains. We bring them together for over 6 hours of guest speakers that are talking about, you know, different topics. They are breaking out into teams. We've got team leaders that are students that have been trained throughout the year. So we're building leadership in our community around this. They break out and do different Think Act projects. You know, what do they feel about this? What do they think about this? And then how are they gonna be active in their society? So it's kind of getting them to identify, you know, what do you do with that passion, or what do you do with something when someone offends you, instead of just acting on emotion. But we're really excited to be working with the community. So we would love for all of you to follow us. Dawn's gonna love that I do this plug on social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, we are on Twitter. We made our first reel. But again, you know, we work with parents, teachers, students. We actually just did a guest speaking ad. We worked with Unity and Community and did a presentation on race and identity and intercultural conversation. Intergenerational conversation. We did it up in Davidson.
And what I like about.
5 generations
and
represented.
What I like about what you're saying, and this is something that is in terms of what we've been talking about too, if you understand that within the young population, that's aged between 22 to about 32, I call them the young population, Generation Z, we're finding out that 40% of Generation Z is people of color, young adults of color. In that same group, 80% of them say that they want to work with a company that does work around diversity, inclusion, and equity. So we come from an older generation, but this younger generation that are beginning to coalesce around the issue of commonalities and differences. And that's, I think, the hope for us. That's why, David, talk a little bit about the young professionals. that we
Before you
do
do it,
here.
let me ask for one quick question.
Please.
How are your participants selected?
For our summer summit,
Yes.
they can just.
They have to be in high school.
They have to be in high school, and they
Yeah.
apply, so we put it out there to all of the high schools in the area. We have it on our website, it's word of mouth.
And it's free for any student to attend.
Yeah, we have
We have
community
sponsors that sponsor students. Anybody can sponsor a
That's
student.
so good.
So
Yeah,
that
I
the
love
students
that.
can attend for free, so
And
the cost is not an issue.
There's one thing that's and we talk about this in almost every time we get together, is that you're not born a racist. You are taught that in the environment you live in. And, there are stereotyping those that come from a certain area of the state, of the country, or what have you, doesn't help, because they could look like one thing, but be completely different. And that is where I think including, we talk about diversity is given, but inclusivity is what really drives things. We've got to be willing to talk with those that don't look like us and are not, and someone who doesn't have a college degree versus someone who's got a PhD, let them talk and they're on the same level. It's not like that, because that doesn't work. They have to be at the same level. My daughter, who is 35, will say the man next door, whereas older, I would have, I have a black man next door, I have a white man next door. Being white, I wouldn't say a white man, but if there was someone different than me, I would point that out in just the normal discussions of what we do. And that's where we come clean in our meetings. We talk about this, and it's not intentional, it's how we're brought up, but we want to learn more, we want to understand.
Yeah, and Angela made this point, and that's why I want to ask you about the young professionals and what the chamber is doing with the young professionals, because Angela brought it up in terms of some next steps that we might do. So would you just speak just a little bit to that young professional group?
Well, sure. I mean, the young professionals came out of the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce. And when I became board chair this past year, that was one of my big things I wanted to do, was really involve the young people, because the young people are the future of the chamber. And they're open for all discussions. They're very welcoming. It's a great group of people to get involved with. They also do 4 philanthropy events every year. So they're willing to work with the community. They love helping out. They do stuff for Pat's Place. They do stuff for Angels and Sparrows, Big Brothers and Big Sisters. They have at their meetings once a month, they have a speaker, and the speakers talk about the community. Sometimes we have Rotary come in. Sometimes we have other nonprofits that just like to get the word out. So something like this would be an incredible topic to bring up at one of the young professional meetings, because they want to be as welcoming as possible, invite as many different people together, and that's a great question, and I'll definitely bring it up to Bailey, the president.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Something that hasn't been mentioned is geographical location and socioeconomic statuses, which are huge. I'm from New York, born and raised. Having business up there, I had a trainer come from the West Coast, and she would say, "Oh, you gals, and I had to say to her, "Look, we don't say that here. You say that to the wrong person, you're gonna be in trouble. So you're gonna have to rephrase your words a little bit." She laughed, but I had to tell her, because certain words or triggers and connotations adds to how people feel and how they interpret things. So we have to be sensitive about that. Second thing is that I grew up in the Bronx. When I was 12, we relocated to Yonkers.
Wow.
At that time, we were going through desegregation. This was in the 80s, the school district. And we were being bused from one side of the town, 45 minutes to the other side of the town, so that the schools could be integrated. Growing up,
In the 80s?
In the 80s, yes, 1986. I did not see color in my community. We were a melting pot. My best friend was from Honduras. My other friend was from Puerto Rico. My other friend was Italian. We went over to each other's houses. We ate food and we just came together. But when the segregation piece came into play, it just got weird. And then when I moved to Pennsylvania, that's when I started experiencing the racism. Because a lot of people never experienced and or seen a person of color. They didn't know what our food was like and that sort of thing. And then I've been down here 5 years. When I first came down, it just felt like home. Well, it makes sense because my grandparents are from Alabama and West Virginia and stuff like that.
Food is similar.
Food, well, not really.
No,
But just the atmosphere
Yeah.
and the well-being of everything. But I think that being an entrepreneur, especially in the field that I am in, I'm always that one person in the room. And then as a female in the room with male counterparts that don't look like me, don't talk like me. And so in my career, it has made it challenging to forge ahead because of the things that I had to unlearn inside of me that were taught or maybe not taught or not said, and biases and stereotypes and all that other stuff. But being engaged in different types of groups, I'm like, we need to get past this, because we're never gonna get anywhere if we hold on to not negating the fact that it's there, but understanding where these people are and where they sit at the table so that I know how to navigate and still make it through.
Now, we were just having a sidebar conversation. I told her, I was like, I actually want to know who the racists are.
Yeah, you don't have to like me.
You don't have to like me. I want to know who you are so I know how to treat you.
Right.
Right? Because it's easier for me.
And where that boundary is at.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
We run out of time, but let me just get 1 minute from each of the panelists, just in conclusion, anything that you want to say in conclusion. How do we spend Bill's money? Why don't we start with you, Chris? First.
Okay, I would say to diversify your businesses wherever you work. Tap into Johnson C. Smith University. They have a lot of great students there, come from a low socioeconomic background that are very intelligent. Tap into that school. You will be very surprised at the quality student that you will get, and you'll learn a lot from them.
Jay?
Well, I think that the thing to take away is that just get to know another person. Don't be afraid to say what's on your mind. When I sent out my email to remind my email blast group of this thing to watch on Zoom, I kind of went through this. I sent the email that I read to you all, I sent it to a black friend of mine. And the lady who does my social media says, you can't say that. It put in context of why I was, writing to Chris, because why would I write another white guy about the riots? But I think we are, and I don't disagree, but we're so afraid to say something, no one says anything. And it builds up and it builds up and then it explodes. Because it's going to come out. Just don't know how. Whether it be, we've had more shootings going on in this country. It's just like every day there's something going on. And what's building up in these people that causes that? That's a whole nother issue. but we can't contain it all and be, if we talk about it, be looked down on.
Angela? Angela is, by the way, our token.
The
You
token
might have
female.
noticed that, y'all.
Northern female.
Token northern female with Native American
She fits a lot of check
genealogy.
boxes that
Yeah,
we didn't.
so they're like, what box do we need to check? I think for me, what I learned or what has helped me the most in getting together with these gentlemen and understanding was something that Chris said, which I know is actually attributed to somebody else, but because Chris said it, I'm gonna give him credit. Seek to understand if you wanna be understood. And that truly is something that when I get into a situation that has to do with race relations or even anything that might be controversial, I have to learn to shut my mouth and listen. But not only listen, but listen with an open mind, growth mindset versus a closed mindset. And that has been extremely beneficial to me. So if you can take anything away from a group setting or a one-on-one conversation, be willing to sit back and truly listen to the other person.
John?
I've sit here for the last 4 or 5 minutes and asked myself, how did I want to answer that one? And it's difficult in 1 minute to answer it. But the first thing that I think what we need to do, we need to walk out of here and tell ourselves that I want to make a bigger attempt, and it really will have to be an attempt to get to know more people that's not like me, like your group. If you just put it out there on a website and say it's available, especially when you're dealing with minorities, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, or whoever it may be. I think sometimes you have to make a special effort to convince them to come and participate in that program. By and far, in lots of it's because of training and background and experiences in life, white kids are by far much more aggressive than the other ones that I've just talked about. They see it, they jump at something. We don't see how it possibly could benefit us. So I think you have to be intentional to make sure that you get other people engaged in it. Everybody in this room have to walk out of here and be intentional to say that I'm gonna make sure I get to know someone else that's not like me better. One thing I can say that me and my wife both talk about all the time, we'll leave this world, won't leave rich, but one thing that I'm convinced of that we'll leave here in the 22 years that we've been in business is that there's a ton of folks in the region that have a different perspective on African Americans than they did before they ever walked into Foster's Frame and Art Gallery. Our customer base, and we knew that it was gonna probably be that way from the day that we started doing the business plan. Our customer base is probably 75% non-African American. And that don't bother me because it's the world that we both grew up in, working in. Did not live in it. We lived in it from a negative standpoint, but from a work standpoint, we did. But the biggest thing that I'll say that the people that walk out of there that keep coming back in and keep giving us reviews have a different perspective on who African Americans are. And that's what we have to do. Not only have a different perspective who African Americans are, but we also have to have a different perspective on who white Americans and Asian Spanish Americans are also.
You know, and I'm gonna tap into that word intention, because I think that's such an important thing that how can we all be intentional about this work? I do a lot of work around diversity, inclusion, and equity. And one of the things that I do know, and I'm very, very optimistic about this and very positive about the way we go in the future, part of that is the young people and what their experience in their life. But also part of it is because this kind of group here, where we get a chance to do dialogue. There is a difference between, again, the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And there's also a difference between looking at the glass half full or half empty. And I think that given what's going on in the climate, we're hearing so much negativity that some people think that the negativity is what's supposed to be happening. It's the order of the day. And what we're finding out is there's a lot of positive stuff happening in our communities, in our country, that we don't hear about a lot. But I think I like what you said, that Twitter may not be here. And that might be a good thing, I don't know. But for the most part, the whole notion of this thing here, and I'm gonna just give Bill some real credit for bringing together, years ago, bringing together the Diversity Council to do exactly what we're doing today. It's allowing the conversation to take place in a safe environment where there's a lot of respect for each other. Cheryl, did you have a word?
I wanted to say briefly, thank you so much, Dan and Bill. This is a really good start of the conversation, but there needs to be a part 2 of this forum.
Oh, yeah.
Where there's specific questions and scenarios where we can hear everyone's opinions and, just really listen, and it's because it's a very crucial and important topic in real life situation.
Yeah.
And so
I would love to see
along
that
those
part.
lines though, if you all even send, I guess, the email to Bill or whoever, but if you have ideas of how we could make this work further, I mean, this is the first time we've ever, Chris and I talked a long time ago about getting in front of a group and talking about this, but we have to, what's the next, how do we take it further? And ideas, I mean, you don't want this group of 5 deciding everything, that's not a group. I
We
mean,
don't wanna decide.
No, I don't want any more responsibility.
Well, I think we've heard different things here, like when I was talking to Jesse, and he's talking about his board membership, I'm not gonna talk about the group that you belong to, but for the most part, Jesse talks about what they've done there in terms of diversity and inclusion. So we see there's a lot of stuff going on here, and that's why I wanted some of the folks to say some things that are happening. There's a lot going on. And so if we can figure out a way just to get that information out, that all this stuff is going on, and we don't have to stop here. We can have I do a Zoom, about once a week, or once a month, I do a free Zoom call on this topic. Anything can go in that. But we also could have something the chamber might do an evening, and again, we spend Bill's money on it, get some wine or something, we can, I don't know if that's allowed or not, but
It's allowed.
It's but we could.
You get 2 tickets.
Yeah. But that could be one of the things that we could easily do that, just have an open forum and, just everybody come in and talk. But I love that idea about what Matthews down there, Matthews are doing. And I think if we could duplicate some of the stuff here, got enough people in this room to say, hey, let's talk to some pastors about duplicating what Matthew's doing now. That would really, I think.
They've done over 13, and I was looking at my notes, the last one was about, how do you talk to your kids about race? So, and they bring in town officials, they bring in, police, everyone, sit on the stage, and they do a Q&A at the end, and everyone's very open and honest.
Yeah, and we did 2 of those kind of forums here. And the chambers did 2, where, how do you talk to people about blah, 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 blah. But I think that if we can do what they did, we got the young professionals involved, and we can get the younger folks and some of the nonprofits involved in it, I think we would have something here. And maybe the Diversity Council can take a lead on that and see if we can drum up some support. Cheryl, for your idea.
Well, Dan, I would just want to remind everyone that Unity and Community has been around for 5 years.
There you go.
I mean, we're celebrating our 5-year anniversary where we've been talking about racial equity in the towns, in the North Mecklenburg towns.
Yeah.
So we have been doing this for 5 years. We have large group meetings. Ridgely was a guest speaker. We have small groups. We have dinner events. We have everything you've been talking about has been existing in these North Mech towns for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So this isn't creating, it's not inventing the wheel. We've been doing it for 5 years now and have an amazing nonprofit organization that's available to everybody in this room. So we need all of you to show up in that space because we've already been there for 5 years. So I would extend that invitation for everybody here to look into Unity and Community as a nonprofit that is doing exactly what you're hoping people would be doing.
Well, let's talk, we could send you a notice and maybe
Yeah.
somewhere we can collaborate on some stuff as well as if we can move.
Yeah, because one unique piece is when you come to the black community, the church is the epicenter. If you get the faith tied in, then you'll get a lot more fun.
I'm so glad you guys came today. This has been to me a wonderful way to extend the work that we've been doing organically. And thanks again for coming. And let's take up Cheryl's suggestion and let this not be the end, but part one of at least part 2, 3, and 4. So I want to thank you again for coming, and it's really been a good. Please do not leave the food that the famous Toastery provide for us. We got some cookies there, and I know if you don't take them, I'm telling you, me and Bill, we're gonna have a good time here the rest of the day. All right, thank you guys.